Welcome to the Primal Edge Health podcast. I'm Tristan, and you can find us at www.primaledgehealth.com. Today we've got a really special episode for you. A little bit more serious, a little bit more deep than most of the episodes in the past, because this episode is about something that affects millions of people worldwide. So, the gentleman I'm talking to today is named Andrew Scarborough, and he's been dealing with a serious form of brain cancer. He had a brain tumor the size of a golf ball. Now, Andrew's been using metabolic therapy, namely a ketogenic diet, and has had great success in managing post-operation his cancer. So, we're going to talk to Andrew about his experiences using a ketogenic diet as an adjunct therapy for cancer. Some of the subject matter might make some people uncomfortable. I understand that. We get pretty deep into Andrew's description of his experiences before he was diagnosed, some of the seizures he had. A lot of this stuff can be really, really difficult to hear described. I know I myself got choked up several times during our conversation, but I really appreciate Andrew coming on. If there's anybody else out there dealing with cancer, I hope it shows. I hope we get across the fact that metabolic therapies are a viable resource for cancer patients. I really want to emphasize the need for more advocacy on behalf of cancer patients who are dealing with these serious diseases, life-threatening diseases, for which the conventional treatments have not historically been very effective. And Andrew's got firsthand experience using a ketogenic diet to manage cancer as a therapy and treatment for cancer, as well as for its neuroprotective effects in preventing seizures, which was a major issue for him, having such a large brain tumor. I know this episode may be a little bit heavy for some people, but I'm really happy that I could bring this forward and give Andrew a platform with which he can share his experience and hopefully inspire some people to take control of their situation a little bit more, to realize that there are things outside of the conventional radiation, chemotherapy, and surgical procedures that most cancer patients are limited to. So I'm really excited to bring you this episode. Thanks for tuning in. And check us out at www.primaledgehealth.com. Enjoy. Welcome to the Primal Edge Health podcast. I'm Tristan, and I'm here with my buddy Andrew Scarborough, all the way in the UK. And today is a very different episode. We're going to get a little bit serious here, and it might be a little bit heavier than the material you're used to on this channel. Now, we've talked a lot about ketogenic diets, how people can use them for weight loss, fitness, and all this fun stuff. But perhaps the most interesting aspect and interesting application of ketogenic diets is in the battle against cancer. Now, I've talked to a lot of researchers who have done research into the mechanisms of a ketogenic diet, how it might be used as a therapy for cancer, and who maybe used it in some trials. But today I'm going to talk to Andrew, who's actually dealt with a very, very serious form of cancer. And he's here with us today to speak about it, to share his experiences, and I really appreciate him taking the time from his life to come on here and to share with you guys. So we're going to get right into it, and we'll start from the beginning. Andrew, how did you receive your diagnosis? How did you come to realize that you were dealing with this serious illness? And maybe go ahead and walk us through some of the beginning of your story in your journey, your battle with cancer, your victory over cancer using a ketogenic diet as therapy.
I first was having symptoms of my brain tumor long before I realized what was going on. I was studying for a master's at Westminster University in nutritional therapy, and I started to suffer with quite severe migraines, and just as a typical male, I just carried on. And I didn't ever like taking medication, so I just
Did the migraines interfere at all with, your daily activities? Was it disruptive in your life?
Yeah, I was finding it harder and harder to concentrate on my work. As it was a master's, it was very demanding on me, on my time. I was also at the time developing my own fitness product. I used to be a personal trainer, so
So you were a relatively healthy individual living a lifestyle that most people would say, "Hey, I'll probably never get cancer because I work out. I'm into you're studying nutritional therapy." I mean, it sounds like you were doing a lot of things right in most people's eyes.
yeah. And at the time, it was before high fat, low carb. So the kind of diet that I thought was good for me, doing all this exercise and being an exercise class instructor as well as a personal trainer, I just thought to keep up, I have to continually have all these carbs and
Yeah, high protein, high carb.
yeah, and I thought high protein was really good, and I now know differently. But going back to my diagnosis, it was a long while until I actually received that. Like a lot of people who are diagnosed with brain tumors, I had many misdiagnoses. I was quite fortunate that I'd studied the ketogenic diet on my nutritional therapy course before, prior to my diagnosis, and my diagnosis came about. Well, the whole proper symptoms, I call them, of the brain tumor when I was more aware that something very serious was happening is after, as I say, the few months of debilitating migraines, and then I started to have flu-like symptoms.
So like constant flu-like symptoms. I mean, just you felt like your immune system was low and you're constantly kind of battling something.
Yeah, and my head felt very, very heavy. So I just thought I had a really bad strain of flu. I never used to take medications, and I started to take medication just because it was so bad, and sleeping pills because I couldn't sleep because the just tension on that side of my head was just so much. I knew nothing about brain tumors at this stage, so
Yeah.
I just thought I was stressed because I was a workaholic. I was constantly trying to do lots of things at once, and I'm a perfectionist, so I wanted to do the best I could. I felt like I was just stressed out, and that's why I was getting all these headaches. But then suddenly in February that year, I suffered speech arrest, where
Wow. That sounds very, frustrating and scary.
yeah, I was just talking to a friend, and then suddenly I lost my speech, and I could think of words, but words wouldn't come out of my mouth. I had moments where I could, the opposite would happen, where I could say things. Well, I could make noise, but I couldn't think of the words. So that connection was disrupted, and that was quite scary because I didn't get my speech back for about 4 minutes.
Oh wow! Yeah, that 4 minutes probably felt a lot longer than 4 minutes, huh?
Yeah, it was just very, very strange. And even then, I just thought, oh, maybe I've just worked myself too hard in the gym, and I was at my fittest and healthiest at this time, or so I thought. So I just found it very, very odd. I'd run 5K the week before, and it was, I had a personal best, and yeah, I thought I was really fit and healthy, and that was. I didn't know it at the time, but that was my first partial seizure. But I just recovered and then carried on doing what I was doing. And then a month later, again, after a heavy gym session, not to say working out is bad for you, but it was just coincidental.
It doesn't prevent. It's not going to prevent disease. I mean, it's just because you're not overweight, just because you're not just because somebody's body looks great doesn't mean that they're healthy on the inside. It just shows that this guy on the outside appeared very healthy, and he was living a lifestyle that most people would consider very healthy. Yet
Yeah, I had a lot more lean tissue, so I was much bigger, but because of the restricted ketogenic diet, I'm much smaller, but I'm not unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very lean, so completely different kind of body type, but very healthy.
Yeah, well, it's like when you're dealing with something like cancer, you have to starve it. So to a certain extent, any excess tissue on our body that's metabolically expensive, when we're dealing with a chronic disease, our body will want to get rid of it. I mean, we want to maintain our brain, our heart, and everything, and you don't need 30 pounds of muscle that is unnecessary, that's, maintained artificially through movements that you probably see what you were doing before a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, my daughter's got a unicorn. She's begging me. So how did the actual diagnosis come about? You started getting these symptoms. You had a partial seizure. When did you receive, and what was the last straw before you finally went and saw a neurologist or an oncologist?
Well, the thing is, I saw a doctor about it near where my university was, and they said, yeah, it's probably just stress, because that was before I had the partial seizure, but I didn't think anything of that partial seizure because I wasn't educated enough to understand that there are so many different types of epilepsy. And then 2 months after that partial seizure, after a workout in the gym, I went on the train to go home, and it was a busy train during rush hour. I'd gotten onto the train with just an increasing pressure in my head that felt like just someone was kind of like when you have the nutcrackers and it's kind of like someone's...
You feel like your head was in a vice or something?
Wow. Yeah, and just the pressure was getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
And your perception, then, could you see and hear during the time, or was it just the...
Yeah, I can remember it just very vividly every moment. I still got post-traumatic stress from it. What happened is I'd had increasing pressure in my brain where I then suddenly started to make yelping noises that I couldn't control.
Man.
And I'd wet myself, and I was trying to control the uncontrollable. It's kind of weird when your body's doing things that you can't control. And then I'd suffered a massive brain hemorrhage, and I'd gone completely unconscious. And I woke up on the other side of the train, just very confused and with lots of superficial injuries. My tongue looked like it had gone through a blender, and I just had a paramedic talking to me, and I just felt like a zombie. I couldn't concentrate on anything he was saying, and I couldn't speak, so my speech was completely gone. I couldn't move. I'd lost movement, and that came back a little bit after a few minutes. But then I was just surrounded by everyone on this really busy train, and the train had stopped at a station, and people were just looking really concerned. I noticed that the trains were delayed by, must have been about an hour, so I must have been unconscious for a really long time, but obviously I didn't know that. But then, yeah, I was just taken away by paramedics, and then had many tonic-clonic seizures after that, which were life-threatening. So I'm quite lucky to have. I was quite lucky to have come through that, and then I was given a few misdiagnoses.
And they say there's no way they could tell you that's just stress. I mean,
no,
that's just stress. You just worked out a little too hard today.
Yeah,
no.
That was one heavy workout. Yeah.
I mean, this might be hard for some people to hear this. I mean, that was really, I kind of got choked up just hearing that part of the story. I mean, it's a horrific experience, and you know, I can tell that you're still healing from it, and you know.
Yeah, I still have invisible disabilities, but being on the recovery that I've gone through is just so has been so progressive that it was severely debilitating at first, just, you know, having tonic-clonic seizures all the time.
Yeah.
Having your speech go just as you're talking to people, being bedbound for months and months, and that's not fun.
One question that comes to mind is, do you see life much differently now afterwards than you did before?
I see life incredibly differently. Mostly because if you're told, well, when I eventually got my diagnosis 6 weeks after my operation, the reason it was the reason it was 6 weeks after my operation that I got my diagnosis is my final diagnosis is that partly the tumor was so vascular that it was being misdiagnosed for all these other things, and having a vascular tumor isn't a great thing, because
so I mean, I'm visualizing a tumor that's, you know, able to pump a lot of blood and swell up occasionally.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was a golf ball sized tumor between you can see a little bald patch there, kind of missing hair, thinning hair, between the speech and movement areas, and touching the motor strip. So there was a little bit of disease that they couldn't remove, because I would have either been left paralyzed or dead. So probably a good thing they didn't touch that, but not such a good thing in terms of just thinking ahead and knowing that at any time you've got a ticking time bomb in your head. So I was told 6 weeks after my operation that I had an incurable type of cancer that was terminal, and this was 2.5 years ago.
So they told you this is incurable. There's nothing we can do, and
they told me it's treatable and not curable.
Yeah.
And then I was told your only option is you have to have chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and we'll see you on Tuesday. This was a Friday.
We're going to start radiating you on Tuesday. Wow.
Yeah, it was to talk about the treatments and to sign a paper to say, yeah, I'm okay with this. But
what was your initial reaction? What was your initial reaction to this? I mean, had you heard much of? I mean, it seems to me like most patients are not really aware that there might be other things that one can do. I mean, you see people. There's an individual on YouTube right now who's dealing with testicular cancer that is, you know, spread to other parts of his body, and it seems like a lot of people they haven't heard that there are nutritional therapies that you can use in addition to conventional therapies. So I mean, what was your initial reaction and feelings about the therapy that they recommended?
Well, the first thing that I asked when I was able to is just, what do you think about the ketogenic diet? Because I'd heard about it when I was studying before my diagnosis.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a fortunate thing that I'd learned about it before.
Yeah, the seed was
But
planted.
the thing is that their reaction was just, I won't do anything. There's no research to say that it'll have any effect. The brain needs glucose, so it's pointless even trying.
Yeah.
So my reaction after that was, okay, maybe this person knows more than me.
Yeah, they're the authority figure. They're the ones who are supposed to help. They know what they're doing. We assume that their knowledge is complete or godlike. Some people assume that the doctors, because they're a doctor, they know everything. And people have to realize that, look, this is a field that can be blinded sometimes by, their education or their lack of education, their lack of new knowledge of new research that's coming out in different modalities.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not one of these patients that would say, "Oh, I hate all doctors. I can't trust them."
Right? Because where would you be if you didn't, if you hadn't had?
Yeah. I think a big part of the problem is the education when they're studying medicine. They only briefly go over nutrition, and it's not. A neuro-oncologist will know much more about the drugs he's giving you and the radiation, but he or she won't know how nutrition affects what you eat, affects your brain. And even with neurologists, they tell you with the epilepsy medication, they tell you that the ketogenic diet will work for children but not for adults. I had that response so many times from different neurologists, and what I did is, after having all these responses, is that I had collected a body of my own research to show them, so that it wasn't just my opinion. I could actually show them something, and then.
So you ended up as the patient bringing some information, bringing some knowledge that you had accumulated to the table, and actually showing your doctors that, look, this is something that could work for me. And
yeah, I think that it's quite a powerful thing if you can give these medical professionals something from their peers that they can then take and look at, and then say, if they're humble enough, they can say, oh, you've got a point here. And I would encourage any patient to get their information together if they just to do research and to look up things that they're interested in, or that they might hear about, because there's so much rubbish out there, but there's actually also a lot of good information if you look at peer-reviewed studies, and if you contact people like Dominic, who you've mentioned earlier. And what I do is I take this folder that's got all my research in, and that just has everything that I'm doing in there. So if anyone asks me what I'm doing, it doesn't sound like just one of these anecdotes that people, you get so many anecdotes from cancer patients where, oh, I did this and it cured my cancer, and it's an anecdote is it can be useful, but there's lots of things where you don't hear all the information, or you only hear one side of it. So
well, I mean, especially, I mean, it's almost like worlds colliding. I mean, some of these anecdotes are like from like faith-based healing systems. From, I mean, there's fasting. Like juice fasting, a lot of people use, and I guess part of the issue is the language and the framework with which it's explored. It's like we can't just because it works for one person doesn't mean it'll work for everybody. But just because it doesn't work for everybody doesn't mean it won't work for one person at the same time. So It's an interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
It's an interesting barrier.
One of the things that I'm a big advocate for is testing. I'm a huge fan of testing, so I have a vast array of blood tests that I could mention them all to you, but explain all of them to you. But I have so many tests that it would take all day.
And when did you actually when did the operation occur to remove this large growth in your brain?
I had my operation a month after my brain hemorrhage, and that was to remove as much of the tumor as they could.
So what type of tumor was it that you actually had? I don't think we actually stated the type of tumor. And how did the treatment begin? And maybe go ahead and walk the audience through what the treatment was like, and then we can get into your use of a ketogenic diet within your framework of attacking and treating this very serious disease that you were dealing with.
Sure. Well, I was diagnosed with an anaplastic astrocytoma, which is a grade 3 astrocytoma, which is with brain tumors, it goes by grades rather than stage. It's mainly because brain tumors don't spread throughout the body. Primary brain tumors spread within the brain. So a grade 3 is the second to worst kind of astrocytoma. The worst is a glioblastoma. But because mine was so vascular and it didn't have any of the good mutations, which is the MGMT and the IDH1, if anyone watching this understands what that means, those are the ones where they say chemotherapy will have a response for you. So it's good to have those mutations, and I didn't have them. But I was still suggested to have chemotherapy for up to 2 years after a period of radiotherapy and chemotherapy together.
And did you end up going with chemotherapy and radiotherapy treatments?
Yeah, and I just found that the treatments were making my symptoms worse, my fatigue. I was just in bed all day, every day. I would come out to get some sunshine because I thought that would be beneficial for me, even though I was told by my treatment team to not go out in the sun because I would be more sensitive to it from my area where I was having my radiation, but I ignored that and went out in the sun anyway to get vitamin D. I was really suffering with my energy levels, lowering the carbs. I thought about giving up so many times, but just through perseverance, I continued, and then.
So at the same time you're going through radiation chemotherapy, you're also drastically changing your diet, doing something that you've never, you're used to a high carb diet. So for a lot of people who transition to a low carb diet, they have that keto flu period, and not only are you dealing with keto flu, your head's being radiated and blasted, and you've got chemicals going through your body that your body is just, it's reeling back in pain. And this is really hardcore. I mean, it's hard for me. It's difficult for me to listen to it because I empathize, and you get sensations in your body when you listen to something like this and you're empathizing with an individual. And I want people to realize that it's pretty heavy what we've been talking about so far, and these are very difficult experiences. But Andrew's now studying for. You're studying for your master's, right?
Yeah, I'm studying medicine, and I'm specializing in cancer biology, epigenetics, and the metabolic theory of cancer. So it's kind of biased sub-choices within that degree, but I feel like I need to put into practice some of the things that I've been experimenting on myself and using myself as a guinea pig. So
it's not just this is not just a horror story that we're giving you guys. I mean, there is a big light at the end of the tunnel here, and Andrew has really turned this around. And what I see, from my interactions with him and what he's put out in one of his articles online and whatnot, is I see Andrew as somebody has a very powerful voice for patient advocacy of these nutritional therapies for cancer patients and patients of other diseases. So after your chemotherapy and your radiotherapy, what was the next kind of turning point? What was happening after those 6 weeks?
Well, I was having follow-up scans, so I continued with. I was proposed to have cycles of chemotherapy for up to 2 years after that if I was to survive that time. But I decided to voluntarily discontinue my chemotherapy after I realized that it wasn't going to have any effect on me at all, especially after my oncologist even admitted that to me, but said, well, we can carry on. I suggest you carry on and then with the chemotherapy and see if doing it for longer might have a benefit. And I just said, well, no thanks, I'm gonna
And what made you make that decision? What was it that was this an intuitive thing, or was there some research that you had seen which had suggested that maybe this was not the best route?
Well, it's partly because I felt like I was going to die, because
that's a good indication.
because of how I felt.
Yeah.
I was starting to have problems with my short-term memory. I was having brain fog all the time.
Yeah.
The headaches were getting worse. I was having more seizures. My scans were still showing some enhancement.
So the tumor was not shrinking at this point after?
No. So then what I did is I looked at long-term survivors. I contacted a few. I contacted Stephanie Lipscomb, who had, she was one of the patients to have the poliovirus, an adapted version of the poliovirus injected into her brain, into her tumor.
That sounds so extreme. I've never heard of that story. What happened? We might cut this part out if it doesn't fit in the schedule. What the heck is that about? She got polio injected into her brain?
Yeah, it's
because she had I think I remember this. She was it actually metastasized, or it stopped the spread of her cancer, right?
Yeah, it was a recurrent glioblastoma. So she'd had all the treatment and it had come back. It was like the size of a grapefruit in her frontal lobe.
Oh.
And she had, the virus
polio virus injected into the tumor, like directly to the tumor.
Yeah, and it's now must be 3 to 4 years later, and there's no sign of anything. And I found that the most encouraging story.
That's amazing.
And I was then compelled to think, well, actually, there's more. There's something you can do. So I looked into that amongst many other things, and what I did after stopping my treatment is the first thing I did was contact my old lecturers at university and see what they thought about diet and fasting and ketogenic diets, and they recommended me the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease.
The Thomas Seyfried book?
Yeah, and then I contacted him through email, and I was very surprised to get a very detailed email back about what might help me, with lots of studies and things I could read. as soon as I got his book, I read it cover to cover within about 4 hours. It took me. There was lots of jargon in there, so I made sure I understood all that. And then I just went away to apply what I'd learned. I contacted Matthew's Friends, which is the UK equivalent of the Charlie Foundation in the US. And I was encouraged to learn that they are working with brain cancer patients now. And before that, it was just children with epilepsy. So I thought, well, there's definitely something in this. And then I came across Dominic and his TED Talk. I then, as I was applying the diet to myself, I found Keto Pet through Dominic, where animals being treated with ketogenic diet and hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and I followed a few of the dogs' stories online, and I was encouraged by that. And then I just looked more into metabolic therapy as a whole. So I would say to anyone that the ketogenic diet is certainly not a cure on its own, but it's part of metabolic therapy. So I then went on to looking at cannabis oil, which I didn't just do what a lot of cancer patients do, where they are very desperate, so they're just getting their hands on anything they can, and
some weed grown illegally, hydroponically, with a bunch of chemicals that might not have any therapeutic beneficial
you
effects.
have to be so
well, in the UK,
careful.
maybe the laws are a little bit different, but in the United States, there's several states where medical cannabis is a thing, but at the same time, I mean, I know in California and probably in Colorado also, the quality of this medicine that's being sold and the practices of cultivation,
questionable.
Yeah, that's a very interesting avenue of research that I would love to see more open-minded research about this, because it does seem like, I mean, Rick Simpson, there's a lot of anecdotes about the Rick Simpson cannabis oil working for people.
You may have seen if you've read, I had an entry on my blog where I was curious to learn more about cannabis oil for particularly brain cancer, where it seems to be more receptive to it. So what I did with all my questions is I went to a professor who's working on this research into cannabinoids for different cancers, and he's had some very interesting responses. And I just chatted to him about all my questions, asking him lots of questions about just his thoughts, and it was a really interesting conversation, just because he was telling me how just it could be very effective with a ketogenic diet, but
there could be some synergy between ketosis and the therapeutic use of the cannabinoids. Cannabis oil is not just THC. There's many other cannabinoids that could have therapeutic properties. There's studying CBD.
Many different strains, and it's like chemistry, so it's useful to know what you're doing. And out of curiosity, because some of the questions he wasn't able to provide me with a detailed answer for many reasons.
Or maybe not even able to ask it himself in the way that he would want to, because of funding and legal barriers that could be in the way of that.
He actually took a pay cut of about a third to do what he's doing. So
and these are not just people who just want to smoke a bunch of pot. These are highly well-trained individuals in their field who see these as beneficial possible therapies for diseases and cancer. And unfortunately, they can be stonewalled by bureaucracy. But maybe we're going to see some things open up in the near future. Maybe in Colorado and California and some of these other states in the U.S., we'll see some more in-depth research on these things.
Yeah, I think America is sorting itself out.
In some ways.
Nice to see. In some ways. It's also part of the problem, but that's a whole different story. But yeah, as I was saying before, just the ketogenic diet on its own is not something that I thought was adequate, even from the research that I've seen in humans. And with my first experience of it, I actually, when I started the ketogenic diet properly, with my glucometer and everything, I actually was achieving fantastic numbers of blood ketones and blood glucose to fit in with the therapeutic ratios for cancer management on a restrictive regime. But I was struggling with it horrifically. I was still getting.
You were struggling with your energy and with maintaining the diet?
That, and also really bad migraines. And I eventually cut certain foods out to see what effect that would have. And every time I cut, I started with cutting out nuts, and instantly my headaches got better. And then I cut out cheese, and my lethargy improved. So I had more energy. Then the last thing I did, because I was still getting really bad headaches and I couldn't work out why, so I kept a symptom diary. Last thing I did, which I found really difficult to do just because it's a staple of most ketogenic diets, is I cut out coconut oil. And the reason I did that is because I was told about how through someone on Twitter who was I was going through heard about my symptoms and my struggles starting this ketogenic diet. They told me about salicylate sensitivity, and I looked more into salicylate sensitivity, and I realized that often if you have an acquired brain injury particularly in that part of the brain, you can have more food intolerances, and I found that very interesting and very true for me. So what I ended up doing is, because coconut oil is really high in salicylates, I cut out coconut oil, and then I thought, oh, this is good, and then I cut out all plant food and all carbohydrates.
Wow.
To see
the vegans have tuned out long ago, but that kind of, you get a lot of going back to this Furious Pete thing. I mean, there's people who say, well, if you just do a vegan diet, you can't have cancer. I mean, and it's kind of a ridiculous statement. It's like if I were to say, or you were to say, oh, if you do a ketogenic diet, you're immune from cancer and all disease. It's absurd. I mean, these are therapies that can be used, and I mean, I've never seen any evidence that just going vegan makes you immune to everything. But wow, so you found yourself
I get a lot of abuse from vegans, but
do you get some private messages telling you how you should be doing it?
A fair few, yeah.
It's interesting world we live in, the internet. So essentially, you ended up feeling like you needed to cut out most plant foods because of sensitivities. Yeah. So even greens like broccoli and fibers.
Yep.
Okay, so what does your diet consist of at this point, and at what stage of your treatment was this? What was going on with the tumor at the time, and what was going on with the diet in conjunction with that?
Well, at the time, I guess my diet must have been doing something, because even though it sounds really funny, but even though my seizure activity was still not good, and I was on a huge amount of medication for the epilepsy, my scans were showing improvement, and the size was decreasing? Yeah, and my ketones looked fantastic. They were very, very high. The blood glucose was very, very low consistently.
And they seem to correlate. Like the higher your ketones were, and the better you seem to be doing. And what were you?
Yeah,
You weren't doing. You
even
weren't
though
doing
I felt
chemo at this
terrible.
point. Yeah, you felt awful, right? But
Yeah.
you, I mean, sometimes it's hard to nail down why certain symptoms will be manifesting. And could some of these symptoms have been from just the blast of chemo and radiation that you had experienced? And I mean, that's very harsh on the immune system.
Yeah, and so is a brain hemorrhage, so it could have been.
Yeah, so is having a golf ball sized tumor in the brain.
Yeah. So, forgotten.
Wow. So we're seeing the tumor size decrease. You're dialing in your diet. You're getting you're noticing that, like, you have these elevated ketones, and it seems to be correlating with a decrease in size in the tumor. But at the same time, you're feeling these sensitivities to foods and stuff. And
Yep.
so what did you end up finding was tolerable for you to eat?
Just meat and fat and fish, really.
Yeah. So essentially, everything you were eating was coming from animals.
Yeah. And then I found that I had no headaches. My seizure activity was almost completely controlled. So I felt just like a huge relief.
And so this was like 2013. You began treatment. When abouts was this time when you started feeling, hey, something's working? I'm starting to feel a little bit better here. How long did it take for that to happen?
So I started to feel much better as I gradually cut these things out, which would have been middle of 2014, and then as the months went on, I changed my diet gradually more and more. I'm still changing it now. I'm going even more extreme.
Extreme,
But
you sounds like you're having fun doing it. I mean, you got a big smile on your face. You're enjoying it.
Yeah,
I've seen some of your pictures.
I enjoy it now. I didn't enjoy the ketogenic diet before, but I enjoy it a lot now.
Now, this is what's so cool about what Andrew's doing is he's kind of like blazing new trails in certain ways. He put up a video. He's got a YouTube channel that he's kind of puts out content every once in a while, I guess. And he put out a video of a cricket flour bread. Everyone's talking about using insects as a protein source now. And Andrew's one of these guys that's actually utilizing it and making bread from crickets. And it sounds so funny to most people, but I saw a picture and it looked good. I would try it. I'd eat it.
Thanks. I hope you do.
Airmail me some from the UK.
The way I got into that is I was thinking, okay, well, I'm cutting out all the cruciferous vegetables, which I know have all these micronutrients that I might be missing out on if I just eat, say, I don't know.
For sure, like broccoli or whatever, it would give you magnesium and potassium. So where are you going to get that?
Yeah, exactly. So what I did then is I thought, well, I know that if you eat kind of call it head to tail dining, where you do what traditional cultures did, and traditional ancient cultures where they believed that if you ate healthy organs of an animal, that would help certain ailments in in organs that might be affected within your body to heal better. So I thought, well, that's a good idea, and organ meats are nutrient dense. So the first organ meat I decided to try as an experiment was lamb's brains, and
nice.
I
love brain. Brain is so good. People think it sounds gross, but to me, that's my favorite organ. Brains and liver. Liver is amazing.
Yeah, I was actually quite squeamish about trying it, just because it was
sounds gross.
Kind of yeah. But then my dad lives in the south of France, and I know that in France they, in restaurants you can have brain, and it's a perfectly normal thing.
Here in Ecuador, you go to the meat markets, and the brain's the first thing that's gone. People want the brain, they want the liver. They use the kidneys too a lot here. That's my least favorite. I don't like kidneys. But
I actually used the ick factor. I don't know what you'd say, but as a positive thing for me in terms of the fact that I could easily get hold of some brains from the butcher because they, otherwise they wouldn't get, they just get thrown away or.
Yeah, there's like a
I don't know
low
how they'd
demand
use
for it.
them,
Nobody
but
wants it, so you get more for you, right?
yeah, and it's the same with animal fat. When they're, in there chopping up the animals, I'm very friendly with my local butcher, so I just say, "Oh, do you want that fat?" Because he's got a huge chunk of fat just on the animal that
Oh, the
would
suet, yeah, we
otherwise
get
go
the
in.
suet
Yeah,
that encases the kidney, and it's just like a big thing of fat. You can make tallow from it, and you can get 5-10 pounds of fat just of one animal
yeah,
that would have been thrown away.
and yeah, he would otherwise chuck it in the bin, and I get that for free. So my it makes shopping cheap, and it's helpful for you. It's good for your health as well. These are all
And did
grass-fed
you
animals
notice?
in too. So
Did you notice a difference
uh,
in how you responded to the diet once you started adding in organ meats and these things?
I found I had a lot more energy. Um, I was able to do some exercise because exercise is a seizure trigger for me. So
Hmm.
that was a huge step forward, quite literally in some ways. And just after going to a ketogenic diet conference later on that year, I uh, I learned more about um, ways I could help myself with the ketogenic diet. So Dominic was speaking there. So was Thomas Siegfried, Adrian Scheck, all of the big names in the research into this diet for cancer management were there. So I got to ask them a ton of questions, which was really helpful. And through that, I learned about Charing Cross Hospital, where I now have my treatment, and they're one of the few hospitals in the UK, if not the only one, that really supports the metabolic theory of cancer. And I found that just bizarre because I, from my previous response from my previous oncologist at a major cancer centre, which is known as one of the top ones in the UK, I was just made to feel like what I was saying was like a joke and not to be taken seriously.
Wow.
So to be at a hospital that supports what I'm doing and even offered me a job to help other patients on the ketogenic diet is a huge thing. And I now have MRI spectroscopy as well, which is a more detailed MRI scan looking at the microenvironment, and that will be looking for
These are like
the
biomarkers, kind of
yeah,
ways that you
they're,
can gauge
they're,
progress.
they're looking for biomarkers, and they're very interested in looking at patients who, before going onto the ketogenic diet, what's happening inside the brain, in the atmosphere, the environment, what's changing, and then looking at, I think it's, I'm not completely sure, but elevated levels of choline and
So
copper,
it's like
and so
through using what is it spectroscopy. So it's using light, they're able
yeah,
to see certain frequencies, just like when you're analyzing the chemical composition as a chemist of your
yeah,
work to make sure that it is the compound that you're looking for. And this is how they also do like testing when you get a certificate of analysis for certain things when you're looking for chemicals and compounds. That's really
yep,
cool. So
and
they're able
what,
to do that inside your brain now and look at all. I
yeah.
mean, is this like all the neurotransmitters they're able to measure? Or?
Well, they're able to measure a whole load of things, but it's
Wow.
really fascinating. What they're hoping to do in future is, or at present, I don't know if they're monitoring me in that way. They're monitoring me in loads of ways at the moment, but just looking at how the ketogenic diet changes those changes the environment of your brain in that way.
Yeah, and it definitely does seem to do that. I mean, most everybody who does a ketogenic diet, they end up, people who've never done it kind of think it sounds stupid or culty or weird because they're like, I feel so much better, my brain feels better, and it's totally true. I mean, the second day that I cut out carbohydrates, it was like I felt like I was on a hunt or something. I just felt sharp, and the normal brain fog that I'd been dealing with, like, forever. We all have like dull moments and foggy brains and whatever going on, and my brain fog was just like gone. It was so much better. At this point, you've probably been doing a ketogenic diet for a little while now. You'd noticed really good effects. You'd ceased to continue with chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and now what was going on? How big was the tumor at this point?
When it was removed, there was nothing detectable on scans. But then, after I had my first bit of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, there was enhancement showing. And then I voluntarily stopped my treatment because I thought, well, there's enhancement there and this treatment's not working for me. And my oncologist has said it's not likely to work, even though I was offered to continue having it and I'd voluntarily said no. Well, I was gradually getting remission as my scans continued. And on my last scan, my oncologist didn't actually want to talk about the scan. It was just on the screen in the corner. And I just came in and he just said, "What have you been doing?" Because this is really interesting and there's nothing showing on the screen.
So gone. No indication.
Yeah, no sign of anything. I still think that you have to be really cautious. I don't think it's a cure. I think it's a management strategy.
Yeah.
Because there's still damage to that area. You can still see there's scar tissue there, but there's no sign of disease that was in the previous scans.
Are they monitoring the scar tissue and how that's changing with time also?
Yeah, that's been decreasing as well, which is quite nice.
So your brain's healing itself. You have scars that are healing.
And I completely against the advice of the 5 neurologists that I've seen. I gradually came off all of my epilepsy medication, which I was told that even if I tried to do that, I would probably have what's called SUDEP. I would be highly likely to have SUDEP, which is sudden death in epilepsy.
Well, they told you would die if you got off that medication, and you did it anyways. So what pushed you to make such a decision? I mean, most people, when they hear something like that from a doctor, would take it very, very seriously. What was it that made you look at it a little bit differently?
I think it was just all the research I did. Even though I was still having seizures, I knew that the medication itself could cause seizures, and I knew how different those kinds of seizures would be from my normal seizures. So, from the research I did, I also understood that these medications cause a number of micronutrient deficiencies, including magnesium deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, calcium deficiency, vitamin B12. So
some of the most important minerals and vitamins for immune function get wiped out by these seizure medications.
And if you're deficient as you become more deficient, you're more likely to have seizures. So what they do is when you have more seizures, they increase the medication even more. So I thought, well,
this is like this negative feedback loop that's just getting fed more and more energy. That's insane.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous.
So I wouldn't recommend it for anyone who isn't showing signs of regression in their tumor. But I thought, well, because there's a response there where it's in remission, I can gradually come off this medication, even though the neurologists are saying, "You're crazy. This will potentially kill you." So what
obviously,
I thought
you
was,
obviously believed very strongly in what you were doing, strong enough to go against very, very, dire warnings like that, and it
yeah,
obviously
which
worked.
wasn't easy, but I believed in what I was doing, and I thought, well, how about I just make sure I get enough of these key nutrients, which through the research I know vitamin D has anticonvulsant benefits, magnesium has anticonvulsant benefits, so I started to
It's so
supplement
crazy. I
with
mean, to me, it
magnesium.
sounds so insane. It's like these medications are doing the opposite of what they're meant to do. But there's
Yeah,
problem.
the side effects were horrific, so I wanted to get off them. So I gradually cut down very, very slowly and carefully. I researched what I was doing. I told my neurologist what I was going to do, even though it was completely against their advice. I said, I'm doing this at my own risk. I understand the risks. And thanks to my analytical background, of just the analytical skills that I learned at university, to really scrutinize this research, I learned just how to manage the withdrawal effects from these drugs, because you can get seizures through drug withdrawal, which I did experience, but I had to be very knowledgeable about just knowing, okay, what is a withdrawal symptom and what is something where I'm risking my life and it's crazy and dangerous. And many times I thought of giving up, but I gradually improved and kept improving, and I just stuck with it. And the more I came off it, after a while, the better and better I felt, and the more I was able to do. So yeah, it just snowballed from there, and now I'm on no medication. Sometimes I take a very, very small amount of levetiracetam with DHA, because DHA works with levetiracetam to offset a lot of the side effects and also makes the medication more effective. So
So
I
the
think sometimes,
vetiracetam, that's from the racetam family, that paracetam and aniracetam?
yeah, it's one of the least fun ones. So it's one of the anticonvulsant ones. So it's one that makes you, it's like a sedative rather than the fun ones that make it easier to concentrate and give you.
Yeah. So it doesn't really help with cognition. It just helps to chill the brain out, maybe.
Yeah.
And cannabis oil, did you mentioned cannabis oil was something you explored too? Is that something you've implemented as well, or is that?
It's something that I've investigated quite a lot. I know that high CBD cannabis oil, which is completely legal.
So you could procure CBD oil in the UK and utilize that.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to hear what your results with that would be. It'd be very fascinating.
I know that would have benefit to the epilepsy, but it wouldn't have any benefit to the killing off cancerous cells in the brain, because they work synergistically and they target different pathways. So it would potentially control the epilepsy better. But what I do to manage my seizures is sometimes I have an aura where, because I have so many seizure triggers, which I have to manage constantly throughout the day, what I do is, I know that typically with all types of epilepsy, when people are about to have seizures, their magnesium levels are very low. So what I do is I supplement with magnesium chloride, and I take that orally when I'm actually having an aura, which is a warning for a seizure to occur. I take that, and then the aura actually subsides, which I find just the first time I did it was an experiment, and I thought, wow, this is quite a miraculous kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that came through some research that I did, which is in this folder. Magnesium as an effective adjunct therapy for drug-resistant seizures.
Wow.
So I looked at that, and I thought that's really interesting.
I mean, so here's like 3 different ways that we've discussed so far that are adjunct therapies for seizures. You've got ketogenic diets, magnesium, which I didn't know that, and then also certain cannabinoids, and people have had great success in the United States with using marijuana oil for even children with epilepsy. So this is really interesting that there's so many different modalities that can be explored, and it seems like there's really not that much research that's been done on things like this.
The thing is, there actually is a large body of research, as I've shown, because I have all these things that I show medical professionals, but they're not aware of this research. So what I'm aiming to do when I'm at university is to conduct my own research trials with these, natural compounds. And one of the things I want to work on is either magnesium intravenously or as magnesium sulfate, or magnesium chloride, as I've been using for brain cancer patients with drug-resistant epilepsy, so brain tumor-related epilepsy. And one of the other things I found really interesting is that there's this huge trend at the moment for repurposing drugs. So it's typically diabetic drugs for diabetes, for cancer, repurposing them for cancer management.
So what, like metformin?
Metformin's a good example, but there are others that I think are potentially in the long term actually quite harmful for cancer patients, which is getting quite popular at the moment to use statins. For cancer management.
But for the brain, that's not going to be good.
No, definitely not. And the thing that I found is that magnesium acts as a natural statin. So it has so many benefits that I think that could be a better avenue than using these statins that will completely wreck your ability to, make to handle cholesterol in the right way. It completely obliterates that process, rather than with magnesium, where it's working with that process.
And haven't they found that some of these statins actually highly correlated with neurodegeneration? Yeah,
and strokes and all these things you don't want. So
very interesting. Sometimes it seems like the side effects from some of these medications can be, for a certain part of the population, can be worse than having high cholesterol or something like that. It's but it's a fine line. It's like, for some people these things might be helpful. I don't know. I'm not saying all statins are bad. I wouldn't recommend anyone that I care about to get on them, but hey,
I just think that if there's an alternative, why not use that? But with the metformin example, I think that's a very interesting thing that I wouldn't discount.
It's really interesting. I think maybe some of the hurdles that would have to be overcome would be funding. I mean, how are you going to fund a study that is utilizing magnesium, which you can buy?
Not make any money.
And it's not going to make anybody money except some chemists in China. So it's this is what I think it's important that people realize, that these hurdles do exist, and that getting funding for adjunct therapies for cancer and things like this can be really difficult, which is why like the Charlie Foundation exists, and why people can donate to foundations such as the Charlie Foundation. And what was the one you mentioned earlier?
Matthew's Friends, the UK version of the Charlie Foundation. They work together. It's great. I think they're both incredible non-profit organisations that do just fantastic work, even now for cancer patients, which is so encouraging. And if anyone's watching this who has brain cancer, I would recommend getting in touch with them, because it's not just for children with epilepsy now. They're expanding to these other disorders and diseases. I wanted to use the right words, but yeah.
Yeah. No, this
these
is
other
I think it's really
avenues.
important that there's more advocacy on behalf of patients for alternative choices to just chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and these very taxing and historically ineffective methods, because chemotherapy and radiation therapy are historically not very effective.
Especially for the brain, where you have the blood-brain barrier, so that stops toxins getting into the brain.
Yeah. So you have to load up so
ideal.
much for brain tumors, or what? You have higher doses, or?
Well, it doesn't really work at all. Sometimes you get a pseudo response, where just there's a common term of pseudo progression, which lots of people know about, but it's not commonly known about a pseudo response where it looks like the chemotherapy is doing its job, and you get remission showing. But then what happens is it can actually cause more mutations, and then
the immune system's so low that you're not able to deal with it effectively, and maybe these mutations, it's like it's empowering the cancer almost in certain instances.
Exactly, yeah. And just personally, I wouldn't recommend it for brain cancer. I know that Ben Williams had it and has done extraordinarily well, but he had a drug cocktail treatment that he'd devised on his own, and that was if anyone doesn't know about Ben Williams, he was diagnosed with glioblastoma in 1995, in the middle of his brain.
Wow.
And he's still alive now. I'd recommend anyone to look up his story or maybe read his book. The interesting thing about that is his drug cocktail that he used as his own treatment on himself actually targets many, if not all, of the same signaling pathways as a restricted ketogenic diet does.
Yeah.
So there's a number of ways of doing it. So that's why it's termed as being metabolic therapy, because there's all these areas you can target it. I also take melatonin at night, just because there's so much research into it, and when I was looking into that, I found an interesting study that said people who are blind have are at a much lower risk of having any kind of malignancy, and I found that fascinating. And they were saying in the study that is because they're not exposed to all the artificial light that we get, in particular. And I know that you've spoken with Jack Cruz about it in one of your videos I watched. It was very interesting.
Yeah. Actually, there's a book that it goes a little bit further than just the blue light. Gets into electromagnetic fields and magnetic radiation, its effect on mitosis, and its effect on certain processes in the body. The body electric. This is a very interesting book by Dr. Robert O. Becker, who was he was kind of attacked as a pariah for what he did, but and if you read his book and you look into his research, it does seem to point to there being very potent effects of electromagnetic fields on every single process of our body, including the production of hormones like melatonin. And it's interesting you mentioned that blind people have much higher melatonin. This kind of goes back and connects with another one of these alternative therapies that we discussed, and that's cannabis, because as many people who've researched the function of cannabis, it does increase melatonin. So, and I don't know if it's just THC or if it's something else in there. It might just be THC, but
and also the two medications that are mainly prescribed for brain tumor-related epilepsy, the levetiracetam and sodium valproate, Also, the reasons they prescribe those is because they have anti-tumor properties, and they're not quite sure what they are. But one of the interesting things is that you actually get increased melatonin levels when you're taking those drugs. So that's a potential mechanism, I guess. That's kind of a theory of my own, but it seems to make sense.
Plausible.
And I know that as well. Just you get people who are shift workers and night workers, and they get much higher incidence of the cancers that are more linked to hormones. So breast cancer and prostate cancer are much higher risk for people who do shift work. And when I was a personal trainer, I was doing a lot of shift work. So I was exposed to light, not blue light, but light very late in the day when I should have been.
Yeah. So you had decreased melatonin production. Like that's something right there that we all need to. Circadian rhythms are so important for overall health and function. And even if you're not dealing with a disease, even if you just want to, get fit or lose weight, it's gonna be important. So.
And also I was instructing spin classes late in the evening.
Oh man.
So I was, my body was in that, in that stressed kind of state. Because whenever you do any kind of exercise, there's some degree of cortisol being produced. Especially if you're doing a late night spinning class, where it's
elevated heart rate, elevated cortisol.
Exactly,
when you're not supposed to have that, you're supposed to have that's like a complete inversion of the natural cycle of those hormones. So that's
exactly.
another question. Obviously, nobody's definitively been able to say the cause of cancer is this, and there's this whole war against cancer, and it just seems so confounding. We haven't gone anywhere since the war on cancer began. It's as effective as the war on drugs was. The war on drugs is really effective at locking up millions of people in the United States of America, and it's the war on cancer is just as ineffective. We're seeing more cancer. We're seeing increases in chronic disease today. So obviously, the war on cancer has not really done much to get us closer to a cure. There's so many different types of cancer, and there's so many different theories on the origins of it and where it actually comes from. So, what do you think is a likely cause of cancers such as the one that you dealt with?
In my personal situation, I had no cancer in my family, no sign of disease of any type actually. And then, so when I was diagnosed, it was a complete shock. I knew very little about cancer in general. So when I was told I had brain cancer, I knew just basics in terms of just what I'd read once I was diagnosed and the small amounts I learned at university. But yeah, I thought just that I was very. It wasn't in my family, so to me,
it was an unexpected diagnosis.
So in my situation, I would say it's definitely that it had a metabolic cause. So the metabolic instability was perhaps a cause for the genetic mutations that followed. It's very hard to prove that, obviously, but
so kind of an epigenetic. It sounds like you're going towards kind of an epigenetic thing where we could have a predisposition or something could even happen to trigger this gene expression, and then an environmental factor could actually drive further oncogenesis, I guess.
Yeah, so I would say that the current approach of targeting specific genes in these very heterogeneous cancers is not the best approach once someone has had cancer, but it may be a good approach to have to maybe prevent people who might be predisposed to cancer if they have it in their family. Say if someone has breast cancer as a response to having a predisposition from having the BRCA1 or 2 genes, which, you know, Angelina Jolie had her breasts removed from having that gene in her family, and I would just say that there's so much research emerging into nutrigenomics, which is going on from epidemiological studies on nutrition. So actually looking at how nutritional changes in specific diets, like the ketogenic diet that I'm doing, can actually either change your genes or stop those genes from causing further metabolic change. So
yeah, that sounds like an amazing avenue of study. Are there any other diets that you know of that have been used effectively against diseases such as cancer?
I would say that for more hormone-specific cancers like breast cancer and prostate cancer, it may not be that you specifically have to follow a ketogenic diet or a diet that is very restrictive like mine. Mine's very specific to my own situation. So I wouldn't advise just everyone to go out and do exactly what I'm doing, but we know that whatever the cause, whether it's purely, whether it's in your family where it's a somatic, you know, a genetic cause, or if it's just metabolically, there's metabolic damage, I would say, that you don't know what the cause is. We know that in either situation, research shows that you can actually manage those situations through metabolic treatments. So that's why I'm encouraged by the research I've seen into metabolic therapy, the ketogenic diet, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, those kinds of things. It's very difficult to explain in a nutshell, but
I mean, as somebody that's likely going to get into the research aspect of all this stuff, what is some research that you would be excited to see done in the coming years?
Well, personally, I would say that I'm very into testing. So I think that cancer patients should have a number of blood tests, including tests looking at your omega-3 to 6 levels in your blood. If you look at hallmarks of all cancers, there's systemic inflammation, there is, as we know, the metabolic instability, there's blood sugar dysregulation. There's a number of things that seem to be common with many different cancers, including the hormonal aspects that we've mentioned earlier. So I would like to see, I would like to do my own research where I look at blood tests and cognitive testing for brain cancer patients who may be impaired in that way, and just nutrigenomics, so looking at how the diet, different diets perhaps might influence the MRI spectroscopy scans, or how it might change the blood readings for things like vitamin D and C-reactive protein, which is a marker in the blood for inflammation, see how that changes with things that I've mentioned, so a restricted ketogenic diet, the magnesium supplementation, and then just looking in the blood and then looking at the scans, and then it gives you markers rather than having all these anecdotal reports which don't have any substance, any real substance behind them.
So it seems like what you've been doing yourself is you've been using a lot of these blood markers, you've been using a lot of these tests, and you've been in certain ways controlling your environment, your epigenetic environment, through namely diet. There are things that individuals can do outside of just drugs, chemotherapy, and radiation. So I think it's really interesting you mentioned like vitamin D levels and stuff like that, because this kind of leads into more research being done on epigenetics and environment, and light cycles would be included in that. Disrupted circadian rhythms are connected with increased risk of cancers. I think this is a really important message to get across, is that you're not alone. There's other people that are dealing with these things. And then it's probably very isolating to be in a condition like that where you're told, look, you've got this long to live, this is all we can do for you. It's a very scary, frightening, and isolating situation, but there's people like Andrew who have dealt with and are still dealing with these kind of things, and I think it's really important that people can connect. I would like to see more patient advocacy groups for things like ketogenic diet. I've seen there's a Facebook group, the Ketogenic Diet for Cancer. And some other stuff like that, but I think it's really important that people communicate and start talking and discussing these things and talking about their own N=1 experience with using these alternative therapies to manage cancer. So my last
I think it also needs to be an approach where there's lots of different aspects of it. So you need to have, it's not just a ketogenic diet, you need to have an optimal ketogenic diet. So ideally, in a way, for me, the epilepsy was a blessing. So I could tell that the ketogenic diet was having an effect by my seizure activity improving, and with brain cancer, you can have an indication of how your tumor is progressing or regressing from how your symptoms are. So as my symptoms improved, I got more confident in what I was doing, and in a way that was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. And it seems like maybe in your journey too, figuring out what was optimal for you, you maybe made some mistakes, and it was kind of a trial and error thing of like, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to remove this food. So it seems like it was a lot of research on your part and a lot of focus and intention that had to go into it. But
yeah, I made a lot of mistakes, and I was at one point prescribed. It's in the US. It's called prednisone.
Oh yeah.
It's called prednisolone. And I was, I could have had to take that for up to a year.
And that can wipe out. I mean, that prednisone is no joke. I mean, if you're on that for long term. My aunt's been on prednisone for years and years, and it's just. The systemic inflammation that it can cause and the issues that it can cause in the body are very contrary to what an individual who's battling cancer, having systemic inflammation and a messed up immune system, it's like you don't need to compound that on top of it.
I actually took the prescription from my GP, but I didn't take it because I was put under a lot of pressure to take it. But I decided, well, I don't want to give up on the ketogenic diet, so I'll change things around and see what happens. And it turns out that my theories were correct, which was fortunate, and that the ketogenic diet that I was doing previously was too high in omega-6 and didn't have enough omega-3. So as soon as I added much more things like oily fish, cut out nuts for me, which is a problem, may not be such a problem for other people. For some people they can be a bit less strict about it, but for me I certainly noticed a huge difference when I cut out nuts and dairy. One of the interesting things when I talk to people about this diet in hospitals is that they know what I'm eating, and they think, do I really have to eat brains and eat insects and
Man, and you're probably like, wow, I get to eat all these awesome foods, while these people are eating this crap hospital food. I get like delicious lamb brain and heart and and
Yeah,
oily
but
fish.
I just have to explain to them that they can have a ketogenic diet that works for them, that doesn't have all of these foods that they have assumptions about or barriers about eating.
Yeah.
And it's more important that they're in ketosis, in therapeutic ketosis for cancer management, and that the blood tests that I would recommend them to have are all looking good, and that the scans are looking as good as they can be. So I don't care how they do it. So whatever their diet structure is, we mentioned vitamin D. If they have, I try to get my vitamin D levels in the range of, well, at the moment it's close to 200, which would be 200 nanomoles, which would be, they say it's dangerous, the doctors, but it's not really dangerous for me.
You're
But
using supplemental vitamin D for that?
yeah, and also just trying to get as much sun as possible.
Yeah. So what about vitamin K? Are you
Interesting.
doing vitamin K too along with it?
Yeah, what I do is I have problems often taking supplements because of the filler ingredients. I don't know why, it just causes a reaction in me. So what I do is I have a liquid vitamin D, which has K2 in it as well. And I take a few drops of that every day. I also make sure I get enough sunlight in the day. It's quite hard in England, so
Yeah, right. Well,
I
so that kind of leads into one of the last questions is, what else are you doing? I mean, you've been managing this with lifestyle. We've talked a lot about ketogenic diet. You mentioned vitamin D and magnesium. Are there any other things that you're into, that you have assimilated into your lifestyle and made habits to keep yourself healthy, to keep the cancer away, and to keep yourself on that path?
Well, one thing I'm working on really hard at the moment is avoiding technology as much as possible. Because
Sorry.
I just don't think that's a great idea. But I have time limits, so I limit myself to certain times in the day. I know you can't avoid it completely in this day and age, but I try to restrict myself, and I don't use technology after a certain time in the evening at all, or I don't even have any artificial light, so I go by daylight. So.
Nice. Use candles at night, or?
Yeah, and I also take melatonin, which seems to have an effect on me. It kind of, the first time I was taking it, it was knocking me out. But now I seem to be able to tolerate even higher dosages much better, which is good. I also do resistance training, just with body weight exercises, but because exercise can be a seizure trigger for me, I have to take magnesium chloride orally when I do exercise, because that can deplete magnesium, and in the mornings I do the same, because magnesium levels are lowest in the mornings.
Yeah.
And often people with epilepsy have they have windows of time where their seizure threshold is lowest, and that's typically when magnesium levels are also at their lowest. So that's one thing that I do, which seems to help. I also have lamb's heart often, because that's the best food source of coenzyme Q10, and in people with a range of diseases, that can be very helpful for improving immune function and a host of other things, energy as well. So
yeah, my daughter, one of her favorite foods is beef heart. To some people, they might sound gross, but it's like our daughter. We've had these types of foods around for so long. She asked us for heart. She asked us for liver. She's really into oily fish, and it's just, I think some of these things might sound very off-putting, but that's just a program. That's just a mental barrier. It's just a program that might be keeping you from enjoying a wider variety and a wider array of foods and nutritional sources of things like CoQ10 and stuff like that.
And one of the ironic things about some of the foods that I get is that with the wax worms that I get, so that's an edible insect that's very fatty, so it's great for ketogenic diets. With that food source, I get that from a pet shop, so it's made it's fed in a way that it's for reptiles to eat. But I've looked at how they feed them and how they treat those wax worms, and they're actually fed much better than our our foods that we, our meat that we have.
And commercial meat that's fed corn and soy.
It's all very carefully fed to have the maximum nutritional benefits for the animals. So when I get those from the pet shop, I know that they're at the optimal stage to eat, and sometimes I breed them myself, and I can just tell by their quality and also my blood test readings after, when I look at my ketones and blood glucose, because of the chitin as well. It makes you feel full because it's animal fiber and you're eating the whole animal, so that's the main reason I eat insects. So you get it's very nutrient dense, and you also have insects like black soldier fly larvae, which have lauric acid, which is the highly prized component of coconut oil, which I can't have. So I can have the insects, but not the coconut oil.
Wow. So I mean, look, this is Andrew. He's gone very deep in his journey of discovering what foods work for him, so deep that he's eating some of these foods that he's eating, like the waxy worm,
wax worms, yeah,
worms,
and black soldier fly larvae. Which, if you were to put it in a pill and to tell people, this has many of the benefits, the antimicrobial benefits that coconut oil has, they would probably take it if it was in a pill. But if you were to serve it on a plate, as what they are, I don't think that would be very appealing to most people.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how much you've broadened your horizons of like nutrition and foods. And I mean, when you deal with something so intense as what you've dealt with, it probably makes it a little bit easier to break down these programs and barriers. So that, I mean, let's go ahead and finish on this one. It kind of is a good lead into my next question, and that's, how has your outlook on life changed since your diagnosis and through your journey? Have your priorities changed at all? And the reason I ask this is because it seems like a lot of the individuals that read about or hear about or meet who have beat terminal cancer or very, very intense and debilitating diseases, it seems like most all of them have completely changed the way that they live their life, from the ground up, from their diet and the way that they move their body around to the way that they interact and see their personal relationships.
I would say that I'm a lot more calmer than I used to be. I used to be I would never sit down. I would always be rushing around, a bit of a workaholic, having my priorities all wrong, so it's all focused on work, and not enough of a work-life balance. I appreciate my family a lot more. When I decided to when I voluntarily decided to stop my treatment, my mother was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and as I said, there was no cancer in my family before I was diagnosed, so that was a huge shock to me. For her, chemotherapy and radiotherapy worked, but it nearly killed her, and she had a blood test, and her oncologist said that we can't carry on with the treatment because it's going to it's it's very likely you're very likely to not live through it. So what we did is we changed her diet, and her blood test readings changed remarkably, and we were looking after each other at that time because I was still having lots of seizure activity, and I was quite depressed at the time, and she was quite depressed, and we were looking after each other, but we were also helping each other with diet changes and learning, and we actually discovered that her cancer was most likely caused by osteoporosis medication that she was taking for up to a year previously, causing damage to her esophageal lining.
Wow.
And that was actually found on the biopsy results. So there was actually signs that the medication actually caused the cancer to happen from her endoscopy. And if I hadn't done that research, I wouldn't have understood that. So one of the things that I'm actually trying to do is to stop people with osteoporosis taking the alendronic acid tablets, because prolonged use of that has a strong link to esophageal cancer.
And what's the official? I mean, like, what the FDA in the United States, have they addressed this issue, or I mean, why are these medicines still being widely used if they have such high risks?
Money, I would say. And also just the fact that they can say, well, in the short term there's no adverse effects, but if you look into it more carefully, you'll understand that there's actually been quite a few cases now where those companies have been sued for these increased incidents of esophageal cancer. And if you look at the biopsies, you can actually see a clear relationship between the two. So
yeah.
That's what we found in my mum's case, and she's very healthy now because she's managed to come through.
Wow.
Which,
so you've got two individuals in your family utilizing nutritional therapies to manage
yeah, and
cancer.
Esophageal cancer is really not nice as well. So when you're not able to swallow, that's quite a big thing. So we made lots of high fat, low carb shakes, which were the complete opposite of the high sugar, very very poor quality.
Waxworm and lamb's brain shakes, or
not quite that, but more avocados and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And yeah, just very different, more coconut oil and
yeah.
things that I can't tolerate.
There you go. People need to realize, it's not. You hear Andrew's story, and I don't want people to just remember, oh, this guy ate worms. It's like these things might stick in people's head because people have these programs about food, about what is food, about what is good nutrition, and what they want to eat, what they like to eat. A high-fat diet can be incredibly delicious. It sounds like the smoothies that you were making for her with avocado, coconut oil, stuff like that. You can make these things taste really, really, really good. Everybody's going to have to utilize a slightly different approach to nutritional therapies, like Andrew's doing, and he had to go really, really hardcore, whereas his mom had more leeway, and she could have maybe a little more fun. But I don't know. It seems like Andrew's having fun. He's making cricket flour bread. He's like kind of blazing new trails with these foods and with utilizing them.
Yeah, I would just say the key is monitoring what you do, and also even having symptom diaries as well. So
yeah, it sounds like this experience also, just bringing you and your mom so close together. That sounds like a huge blessing. I mean, very many people don't have a solid relationship with their parents, or many people don't have a solid relationship with anybody around them. And I mean, experiences like this, sometimes you talk to somebody who's been through something so difficult, and you just see there's so much beauty that came from this difficult experience, and so much strength that gets instilled in a person, and I see a lot of strength in the peace that Andrew holds, and I think it's really awesome that he's willing to come on here and share his experiences with such a with a wide array of people. So, Andrew, I really want to thank you for coming on. Where can people reach you? Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to impart to the audience?
Well, at the moment I'm working on a website which will be live in a few weeks' time. So by October that should be all ready, and
I'll link to that once it's up. I'll link to that through our
yeah, I've got a holding page at the moment which just has a few details. It's www.metabolictherapy.co.uk, and I also am on Twitter at @scarbs, which people laugh at it because it's got carbs like in the name, but I don't.
At ass carbs.
Yeah, and also just through kind of like Dominic. I really like how people interact with me on Facebook, and so if you look up just Andrew Scarborough on Facebook, there's a few of us, but
I'll put a link to his Facebook,
and it has lots of the research that I've been talking about as well. So I also have a blog which is linked to that, which is my personal blog, and that has a lot of the research that I've been talking about. So it's not just a bunch of anecdotes, which I think is very important, because it gives people an insight into what I'm doing, and it also allows patients to maybe print some things out and be able to just what they're doing with their oncologists, so that they can discuss these things and have the power to understand that they can have some control over their treatment, and there's choice. They don't have to go down the standard routes, especially if they have, incurable terminal cancers.
It seems like such an overwhelming thing for somebody to be diagnosed with something and told, this is all we can do. We can radiate you, we can give you chemotherapy, and your chances are whatever percent of surviving past whatever date. And I think, I don't know, it seems to me like it's like an assembly line of pain and death a lot of times as cancer industry. And I think it's really important that people realize, hey, we can stand up, we can make decisions that can empower us in our situation, and do things that can help our body to heal, do things in addition to the conventional therapies, or even in some cases replacing some of these conventional drugs with metabolic therapy. And I really hope to see more research like this down the line. I wish I knew of some organization, a charity that people could help out. You've got the Charlie Foundation, and they're branching out, and Billy's Friends, or what was it in the UK?
Matthew's Friends. And I'm hoping that in the future people can donate to my research through my university. So that's one of my main aims, to try and have an avenue where people can put money into metabolic therapy. So the only cancer research charity that I know of that supports metabolic therapy and is putting some money into it, not as much as bigger.
Not as much as going into putting people on statins or developing new vaccinations for children. Unfortunately, there's not much profit to be made. So people, this is going to have to be a grassroots movement almost.
Yeah. Well, the only charity I know of that does it is Brain Tumor Research, which is in the UK, and which is a very small charity, but for what they do, for what they're able to do, it's quite big for them. Just Brain Tumor Research and Matthew's Friends, they're the only ones here, and that's very little money. And they're at Charing Cross, and Charing Cross supports metabolic therapy, and they're one of the few, and they have by far the highest survival rate for brain cancer in the country, and I don't think that there's any coincidence in that. So, yeah.
Well, yeah. If anybody, if any of the audience know of any organizations who are working on things like this that are trustworthy and ethical, which it's another issue when you're donating to charities, is where's the money going to go? Where does the money go when we buy these pink shirts that say breast cancer awareness? And I think it's really important that people support charities where they know where the money's going. They know how much of the money that they're giving is actually going to be put into these, put into helping people. And
because targeting specific genes isn't going to get us anywhere. So
or developing some new drug is not going to be the answer. Unfortunately, it's the race. The race is to find new drugs, and
and you get breakthroughs every week, but nothing happens.
Yeah. Well, any of the audience, if if you've got anecdotes yourself, comment down below or get in touch with Andrew. If you've got recommendations of other charities who are doing things like this, who are doing work like this, go ahead and comment down below and on the YouTube video and share this information, because I think it'd be really cool to see a more grassroots movement for funding for metabolic therapies for battling cancer and battling these serious chronic Neolithic diseases that are so rampant now. So this has been really an incredible and moving podcast, and I'm so glad that Andrew was able to come on, share his time. I want to get him off his computer as soon as possible because as we know, it's like there's lifestyle habits and these other factors can really affect the way our body functions, and to function optimally, sometimes we have to make certain sacrifices and do things that we might not have seen ourselves doing in the past. So, Andrew,
I'm going for a nice long walk after this.
There you go. Andrew's gonna go walk, get some afternoon UK sun before it hides away for half the year.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Andrew's gonna go walk naked through London and get some vitamin D. But thanks for watching, guys. Andrew, thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me.